On demand. Good luck.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to Sunday with Michael Portillo. Let us escape the gloomy weather with a gamble through the golden gates that give on to culture, politics and world affairs. The nation was waiting to hear whether Jeremy Hunt would cut our tax burden in his budget on Wednesday. Only towards the end of his hour-long statement did he reveal that national insurance would be reduced by 2 percentage points for the second time in 6 months. The reduction was parcelled in a pledge to eliminate national insurance altogether, a promise labelled as for the birds by the head of the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Even so, Rishi Sunak has reiterated that ambition in a subsequent interview. Income tax thresholds remain frozen, dragging ever more people into the tax and into its higher tax brackets. Is there anyone to vote for if you believe in lower taxes or an enterprise economy? I will ask my excellent political panel. While pensioners may fume at being penalised in a budget that favoured workers, some may welcome the Chancellor's help for the arts. Andrew Lloyd Webber says that the government's decision to fix theatre tax relief at two generous rates of 40% and 45% could drive transformational change in the sector. Chief opera critic at The Telegraph, Sir Nicholas Kenyon, will discuss that with me. That lover of the stage, Stefan Kyriazis, has been looking at how the theatre is at the moment, reviewing new productions that he's seen this week. Next month will be the bicentenary of the poet, rake and freedom fighter Lord Byron. A compelling new biography examines his life through the tens of thousands of letters that he wrote to friends, confidants and lovers. I'll be speaking to the author, Professor Andrew Stauffer. Later, we'll be debating whether it's acceptable to live in expectation of an inheritance. Before all of that, your headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Thanks, Michael. Good morning. It's Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story. The Princess of Wales has thanked the public for their support as the first photo of her was published after her abdominal surgery. The image, posted on social media to mark Mother's Day, was taken by the Prince of Wales in Windsor earlier this week. Sitting down, Princess Catherine is surrounded by her children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis. She was admitted hospital on January the 16th and left 2 weeks later after a planned operation. She is expected to return to her royal duties after Easter. Meanwhile, police are questioning a man after his car crashed into the gates of Buckingham Palace. The incident happened at 2:30 on Saturday morning. Our royal correspondent Cameron Walker has more.
We understand the gates were damaged, and social media footage or images shows armed police swooping on the car. We know that the individual driving the car was arrested. The gates are also being repaired as well. What we don't know is the exact circumstances as to why the car crashed into those gates. We haven't been given any details of a motive by police, or indeed whether or not it was accidental. Metropolitan Police perhaps will give us more details later on today. But as I said, no members of the royal family were in residence, so hopefully the only thing that is damaged is indeed the gates, which of course are being hastily repaired.
And in other royal news, Princess Diana's brother, Charles Spencer, says he was sexually abused from the age of 11 at boarding school. In an extract from his memoir published in the Mail on Sunday, Earl Spencer says he was targeted by a female member of staff at Maidwell Hall in Northamptonshire, leaving him with lifelong demons. In a statement, the school said it's difficult to read about the practices, which were sadly sometimes believed to be normal and acceptable at that time. Pro-Palestinian protesters are being warned they could be lending credence to extremists. The community's secretary is urging people to question which groups are organising the marches. Michael Gove, who's due to publish a new official definition of extremism, told the Sunday Telegraph there's no excuse for ignorance and good-hearted demonstrators need to be aware they risk fuelling hate and intimidation. In other news, a US military ship carrying aid equipment to build a temporary pier off the coast of Gaza is on its way to the Middle East. The US Central Command confirmed the support ship, General Frank S. Besson, set sail from Virginia. It comes after President Biden confirmed the US would build a floating harbour to help get more aid to Gaza by sea after aid deliveries by land and air have proved difficult and dangerous. The UN has warned that the famine in the Gaza Strip is almost inevitable and children are starving to death. A number of bodies from the premises of a funeral director in Yorkshire as police investigates reports of concerns of the deceased. Cordons remain in place at 3 branches of Legacy Independent Funeral Directors in Hull and East Riding. The bodies have been taken to the local authority mortuary in Hull while police investigate whether any criminal offences have been committed. They've set up a direct line for anyone who may be affected. And cars that don't comply with London's ULEZ rules can now be donated to Ukraine under the scrappage scheme. Mayor Sadiq Khan says from next week, drivers give up their vehicles will be able to apply for grants of up to £2,000. Kyiv's Mayor Vitaly Klitschko reportedly suggested the idea of exporting the cars in a letter to his counterpart. A charity will facilitate the move. The donated vehicles will be used to support humanitarian and medical needs. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Michael.
Thank you very much, Sophia Wensler. Jeremy Hunt was probably trying to manage expectations by leaking his budget ahead of addressing Parliament. I remember when that would have forced a Chancellor to resign. Even knowing what wasn't coming, voters hoping to keep more of the money that they earn must have been disappointed when Mr Hunt confirmed merely another drop in the rate of national insurance. So those on only the basic pension will pay income tax soon, as will millions of others for the first time. What are we to make of a Conservative government whose tax priorities are the opposite of what they were under David Cameron? And talking of the present Foreign Secretary, I wonder what he made of the dash to meet President Maduro of Venezuela, made by his fellow Etonian and fellow ex-Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. I have with me the Times chief political correspondent, Aubrey Allegretti. Ahead of the New Deal for Parents project at the Onward think tank, Phoebe Arslanowicz-Little, and the political commentator, Jonathan Lees. Phoebe, so a voter who wants lower taxes and an enterprise economy, where does that voter put his or her cross?
Well, what I'd like the Conservatives and Labour to do is really start competing properly to see who can offer a really distinctive bold plan to deliver growth. Because if you are a voter who wants a lower tax burden, ultimately to support that, what we need is for productivity to go up, for growth to go up, so that we have the headroom then to be able to spend more, to make tax cuts. Ultimately, we've had very anemic growth in this country for 15 years. We are 30% below where we thought we'd be in terms of GDP compared to 15 years ago. But people's expectations, I suppose, around what government looks like hasn't really declined by 30%. So I think growth is where we need to see much more cogent plans from both parties.
So I think you're saying what I was implying with my question, that neither party has a policy for growing the economy, therefore the voter doesn't have that choice.
Yeah, I think that it needs to become much more clear. And actually, I suppose in some ways we've seen the parties become even a little bit closer together in lots of ways. Particularly thinking about if you're Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, you'll feel slightly peeved this week because Jeremy Hunt has swooped in and taken two of their revenue-raising policies. One, the scrapping of non-domicile tax status, and two, the extension of the windfall tax on energy companies. So perhaps their parties are becoming less distinct.
Jonathan Lees, do you have anything to disagree with in all of that the parties are now on very similar ground economically?
Yeah, and I think it was interesting, actually, that more wasn't made of the Labour trap that Jeremy Hunt attempted to set this week by removing the non-dom tax status, which is actually quite a smart move if you think about it, because the only people who really object to that are the hard right in the Conservative Party, and Hunt maybe doesn't need to worry about them so much, although there isn't so much coherence in government because the Conservatives have been adopting a core vote strategy for a number of years, trying to appeal to their most reliable voters. But I think the fundamental point is that it might be the wrong question to ask, because I don't think that voters are clamouring for tax cuts at the moment. They're clamouring for public services that actually work. They're clamouring for a country that actually works. People have never been so pessimistic about the state of Britain, never been so pessimistic about the state of the NHS, about the state of transport, about their local surgery, their local towns, and it's even worse, it seems, than in 2008. And I think it's no coincidence at all that we have seen wage stagnation since 2008. You look at the graphs in the 1950s, where there was roughly proportionate increase in wages in that time, and then there's been basically just a flatlining since then. And we're going to go into this election for the first time with lower wages than when we started the Parliament.
But politicians have to lead the public rather than simply follow the public. I understand those desires, but Phoebe is making the point that those things cannot be delivered without growth. And Phoebe is making the point that neither party has a policy for growth. Do you disagree with that?
I certainly think that the party should be doing more on growth. And as a person on the left, is what I would like to see much more is a much bolder plan from Labour, with obviously not to kind of announce a plethora of spending promises without demonstrating where that comes from. But the problem is we can draw the wrong lesson from what happened with Liz Truss, because it wasn't the problem wasn't that she and Kwasi Kwarteng wanted to spend a lot of money, obviously by cutting taxes. It was that it wasn't seen as a responsible use of borrowing to do that. What we've seen time and time again over the years is that when governments have sensible plans for infrastructure investment, plan to grow the countries from the ground up, actually investors are relaxed about borrowing, increasing borrowing to pay for that. So if Labour were to come up with some very sensible plans, such as they had over green investment, green energy, and that kind of thing, I think that actually they could get away with it if they show that they were serious and not profligate.
Aubrey Allegretti, a little bit of analysis from you, perhaps. How can it be that we are, broadly speaking, seeing the opposite policies from the Conservatives from the ones that we saw under David Cameron? You may remember that under the coalition, the idea was that you would drive up tax thresholds, so you'd remove vast numbers of people from paying income tax at all. Some of the burden was to be taken by national insurance. We're obviously now pursuing policies that take us in the opposite direction. How can this happen under a single party?
Effectively, the problem that Jeremy Hunt has got is that he needs to raise additional revenues to meet increases in spending targets and demands by people within the Conservative Party. Don't forget things like the NHS, defence. People are clamouring already for it to rise further above 2.5% and for there to be a set date for that. Local government finances are on the brink. Education is desperately in needing of funding ahead of the targets to roll out childcare. And then you've got issues with the court backlogs and the prison services. So all of those things mean that the sort of demands on the Chancellor have grown to such an extent that he's having to raise revenue. But where does he get it whilst sort of trying to at least pay lip service to being a tax-cutting Chancellor? Well, then he has to look at these fiscal drag options. So he is obviously trying to phase out national insurance. The problem is that it's created an issue for him in that he's now signalled he wants to abolish it completely. That, again, signifies a difficulty with the Conservative strategy since 2010, which has been very much to try and focus on supporting pensioners, uplifting them and uplifting the sort of pension rate, if you like, which was historically quite low. But now they are the people who would be most affected, potentially, by a rise in income tax if you were to subsume national insurance. Now, there's all sorts of quibbles as to why that would never happen, or at least it's so far away that it's kind of for the birds as to whether or not it actually would in the foreseeable future. But those are the conundrums facing the Chancellor at the moment and the sort of directional forces that he's being pulled in.
People complain there was no rabbit pulled out of the hat in the budget, but there was an enormous rabbit. Where did this idea come from of abolishing national insurance? I mean, that is a very, very big idea. The territory has not been prepared. We haven't had the philosophical argument for it. But boom, suddenly in a budget and then confirmed in an interview, they're going to abolish national insurance. I mean, do you believe it for a minute, Aubrey?
I don't believe that it's something that they expect that they will be in office to deliver in several parliaments' time, which is how long this would take. It has been floated before. I mean, and I think even George Osborne back in 2014 was talking about ending the unfairness of it. And effectively what it is it's a long enough away target and goal that the Chancellor can point to it and say that there is some meat, if you like, to the vague aspiration of wanting to cut taxes further. But the issue is that nobody thinks that it's very likely, nor that the Conservatives will be in power to deliver it. The number of MPs that I speak to who say that voters are turning off is increasing. The Conservatives can kind of shout and make as many promises as they like, but it doesn't really mean that the voters are listening any longer.
Phoebe, can you imagine the Conservatives having a different policy? I mean, can you describe to us what the different policy would be?
In terms of national insurance?
No, I'm sorry, no, I was going back to the broader question of how you would stimulate growth in the economy. The thing that you say is lacking.
I'd like to see much more concrete plans into how we can make it easier to build economically valuable infrastructure. There's groups like Britain Remade who've done a really good job at pointing out how expensive and difficult that is to do here. A lot of that's planning reform. I understand that that's very difficult, but it's also extremely important. It's going to need to be done sometime. Also, actually, of course, this gets to housing. Make it easier to build houses, make it cheaper to buy houses. And there's other like pro-growth changes that can be made. I mean, the NI cut is in some way that. I mean, it'll improve labour supply. It's forecast to get another 100,000 people working. That's very good. But if I was looking to make more reforms then to taxes, then I would look at things like stamp duty, which we know is very distortive, which we know gums up the housing market, makes all these other problems worse.
We will be talking to Britain Remade later in the programme, precisely about housing. Jonathan Lees, can I change the subject? What did you make of Boris Johnson popping off to Venezuela? Have you any thoughts about this?
Well, it was extremely surprising, for a start. It was odd that he only texted David Cameron on the plane, rather than sort of seeking a kind of permission, because even though the line was that it was a private visit and didn't need to be sanctioned by the Foreign Office, you'd think, and everyone would appreciate, that when a former Prime Minister and when a recent Prime Minister goes on a sensitive delegation to a country that Britain doesn't have a good relationship with, that will be interpreted by people in that country as having some kind of official status or weight. So that would have seemed quite discourteous of Johnson, but not out of keeping with his character, one might say. So the thing that I would find most interesting about it is to find out what exactly Johnson said and how much of what Johnson reportedly said is what he actually said, because as we know, he's not a details man and he loves the vanity and the sort of the state of these things. But I can't imagine that Nicolas Maduro would have been particularly impressed by some things they had to say unless they were sanctioned by the British government. And so I think we still need to get to the bottom of what exactly he was doing there.
Aubrey, it seems, this is a story broken by the Sunday Times, I think, isn't it? It seems that he wanted Maduro to pull away from his alliance with Russia. And it seems that he wanted to tell Maduro that if he wanted to have greater acceptance in the West, to put it that way, amongst the democracies, that he would have to hold democratic elections. Neither of those pleas is likely to get very far, I would have thought, with Nicolas Maduro.
What we're basically seeing is a sort of engagement strategy with countries which have been more sort of cosy and supportive of Russia since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine 2 years ago, and a sort of moving away from just looking at Europe and trying to maintain the sort of bulwark there. So this is obviously a country which is very oil-rich. There's concerns that it could supply potential arms to Vladimir Putin's army as well. So I sort of understand Boris Johnson. He wants to leave a legacy for himself. He wants Ukraine to be one of the things he's remembered for, his response and his sort of support for the country. So he will have gone there with a very clear message. And diplomacy can be quite a sort of dirty, messy world. We normally see the nice veneer of it at the end, the handshakes and the signatures. But there is a lot of this sort of stuff which goes on where politicians are sort of going slightly under the radar and using back channels to try and speak. I suppose the proof of this will be in the pudding as to whether or not Boris Johnson really managed to secure any potential gains for the UK in terms of its sort of soft power work to try and get South American countries to take a more sort of antagonistic stance against Russia.
It's really a rather intriguing journey that Boris has made. I hope we'll get more analysis of that in the future. Thank you very much to Phoebe Haslanagic-Little, Jonathan Lees and Aubrey Allegretti. We'll continue to react to the budget after the break as we consider its impact on the arts. The opera critic Sir Nicholas Kenyon raises the curtain on the Chancellor's plans for theatre.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
Should we put tobacco-style warnings on ultra-processed foods? Boris Johnson is calling on the government to do this. In his Daily Mail column, the former Prime Minister says that people don't know what they're feeding their families and there's too many extra ingredients. That's why I'm asking, should we put tobacco-style warnings on ultra-processed food? Well, joining me now to discuss, Steve Miller, former presenter of Fat Families, Helena Davidson, campaigner and policy expert at the Vegan Society. Right, so I'm going to start with you. Steve Miller, what do you think?
Oh, I'm applauding Boris today. Good on you, mate. And the reason for that is we know that the research on the warnings on cigarettes, I should say, when those warnings were visual, they worked very well. The second reason on a practical level is that we need to stop looking and listening before we start, grazing and putting things in the trolley. And the third thing is that, these kind of signs, or these warnings, I should say, are kind of hypnotic. They trigger the emotion. So they're much more likely to get people to think and maybe resist.
Yeah, so at the Vegan Society, we're broadly in favour of increasing consumer knowledge when it comes to the nutritional value of people's food. But I think it's important to mention that ultra-processed food isn't an issue that's exclusive to vegans. And whilst most meat alternatives will fall into the ultra-processed food category, it largely depends on how we're going to look at how UPFs are going to be assessed, because vegan alternatives that fall under ultra-processed foods, they're actually, on average, healthier than meat products or ultra-processed foods that contain animal products. Really? So I think it depends on how we look at it. We might have to take a closer look at the nutritional profile of individual foods rather than the level of processing.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news. but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Theatre lovies were heard to exclaim some rare words of thanks to a Conservative government after the budget, as Jeremy Hunt chose to fix theatre tax relief at two generous rates of 40% and 45%. Impresario Andrew Lloyd Webber declared that it could herald a once-in-a-generation transformational change. The wider picture for arts funding looks rather bleaker, with some local authorities chopping all arts expenditure amid dramatic cuts in spending. To offer a view is the Telegraph's opera critic and former director of the BBC Proms, Sir Nicholas Kenyon. Welcome back to the programme. Welcome to the studio on a Sunday morning. The government provided some relief to theatres and other groups like orchestras during the pandemic because they were having such a filthy time. And what the government has decided is not to withdraw it, which was the expectation. Is that broadly true?
Yes. The expectation was that it would taper off, reducing year by year. And what the government said, as you say, is for touring, 45%, and for non-touring, 40% tax relief will be permanent. Now, this is a significant plus. It is not the solution to all the problems in the arts, but if you think about it in terms of originating new work, both in the theatre and in the concert hall and in the opera house, it is a significant step forward.
Broadly speaking, does it mean that if you take a punt on developing a new production or a tour or whatever, and it goes wrong, that you are protected against your losses because you can claim tax relief? Is that broadly how it works?
Slightly. It will not completely restore the situation if you come up with something that totally doesn't work. But let's be clear, opera companies and theatre companies are really committed to innovation. And the idea that seems to be around that this is some elitist pursuit where opera companies are only performing operas you know, that are 100 years old, it just won't wash. And innovative companies like Welsh National Opera, for instance, I went down to Cardiff this week to see their new production of Britain's Death in Venice, and it's a brilliant collaboration with a non-art form, i.e. circus. A Cardiff circus-based company has been in to collaborate so that what in Britain's original is the young man that the poet Aschenbach loves is portrayed by a silent dancer. In this production, he's portrayed by a brilliant acrobat. And that's just one example of the coming together of art forms, which I think we need to see more of.
We've been seeing photographs there of that WNO production of Death in Venice. Bring me up to date. You know, when you and I last spoke, there had been this catastrophic announcement by Arts Council England about funding. Bring us up to date with where we stand for companies like Welsh National Opera and English National Opera.
Well, it is still catastrophic for Welsh National Opera, which has had 35% of its funding withdrawn on the assumption that it will no longer tour in England. Now, what the Arts Council, in trying to spread opera around the UK, is doing by withdrawing WNO touring money, Glyndebourne touring money from around England, and the 100% cut to English National Opera, it is very difficult to imagine. What they have now done, and this is, Michael, over a year since these drastic cuts were surprised on the sector, what they have now done is to commission a huge and wordy analysis review of the opera and music theatre section, which includes some interesting data, but is dripping with condescension towards the sector as a whole, in order to sort of retrospectively justify these cuts. Now, obviously, this should all have been done in a thoughtful and measured way before any funding cuts took place.
Why do you think, I mean, you're implying that Arts Council England has really lost its way. Why do you think that that has happened?
I think it has been under pressure from the government, in particular the intervention of Nadine Dorries in terms of moving funding out of London, but they should have fought back against that, rather as Channel 4 fought back against privatisation, and just argued that you could do that, and we're all in favour of there being more activity out of London, but it needs to be done incrementally, and it needs to be done in collaboration with the sector. And so, you know, this could have been paced over 4 or 5 years, and it could have been done in such a way that the existing companies could flourish, as well as the new, smaller organisations that we all want to see brought up.
And the cuts to the touring programmes that you mentioned clearly seem to be just plain against the stated policy. Shall we just, for a moment, dwell on what's happening with local authority funding? The scene there is pretty grim, is it?
Yes, that you can understand all the challenges that local authorities have, because, of course, they have to net off very directly what they spend on the arts versus what they spend on hospitals, schools and so on. But the idea that Birmingham, which has a very proud history of investment in the arts, should be reducing first by half and then by 100% what they are going to put into the arts bodies like the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, well, it may not be the biggest element in that orchestra's funding, but it is still a sign of a lack of belief that these orchestras, opera companies and theatre companies can contribute to the well-being of a city and to the health and happiness of those within it.
Do you think we're going to see theatres go dark as a result?
It's perfectly possible. Some musical organisations have already done so, but I think the big challenge for the opera companies is how do they reinvent themselves in such a complex environment. This study that the Arts Council has produced comes up with the revolutionary insight that opera is an expensive art form. We know that, but we want to see it done in innovative ways. We want to see small-scale Wagner, but alongside that, we need to see large-scale Wagner, and I think that is going to be the big challenge. The Arts Council used to be an advocate for all that was best in the arts and entered into sensible and meaningful discussions with the sector about how to achieve that. Now they're behaving like a PV headmaster.
Sir Nicholas Kenyon. By the way, you and I were interrupted halfway through by Madam Butterfly about how very delighted...
I'm delighted.
That was. After the break, we'll explore the life of the Bohemian aristocrat who blazed a trail through Europe and who died fighting for Greek independence 200 years ago next month. Of course, I mean the poet Lord Byron. Tarry with us a while, good viewer.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Household energy bills will fall by £238 per year. Good news. An average of £20 a month. That's as Ofgem unveils its new energy price cap. So joining us in the studio is GBNews economics and business editor Liam Halligan.
The Ofgem energy price cap, that's the regulated amount that energy suppliers are allowed to charge will fall from £1,928 a year to £1,690. That's from April the 1st. That's a drop of about 12%. That should save the typical household 20 quid a month. Prices are cheaper than they were, but they're still very elevated by historic standards. Certainly if you're an American household, a French household, even a Spanish or an Italian household, you're paying a lot less for your electricity and your energy in general than you are here in the UK. The energy companies have been a bit tricksy with the government because while they are lowering the energy price cap and the headlines are, well, your energy bills are coming down, blah, 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 the energy providers have actually chiselled out from Ofgem the permission to charge households an extra £2.33 a month on average. And the energy companies say that is money which they need, the energy companies, in order to support households who have got big debts on their energy bills. I don't know about you, but whenever I talk to people down the pub about energy bills, many of them say, well, the energy company's got like £2 of my money and it won't give it back to me. What's going on here? So there are lots of concerns about customer balances with energy companies, and it's also worth saying that as part of this announcement, the bit that no one will notice is that the energy companies are being able to charge all households to try and flatter the energy companies' balance sheets, which to me, on first reading, seems a bit odd.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. As I am, Lord Byron was a Cambridge alumnus. He had a Scottish mother, and like me, he fell out with a few Tories in his time. He was a dandy. No comment. And preeminent amongst the romantics. His vigorous and creative achievements in life reverberated through modern history since his death exactly 200 years ago next month, whilst fighting for the cause of Greek independence. A new book, Byron, A Life in 10 Letters, charts 10 distinct stages of the poet's life through a selection of his voluminous correspondence. I'm very pleased to be joined by the author Andrew Stauffer, Professor at the University of Virginia, President of the Byron Society of America, and presently speaking to us from Charlottesville. It's great to see you, Andrew. Welcome to GB News.
Nice to see you, Michael. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
I feel that I know a little bit about the life of Lord Byron, but, and I'm really ashamed to say this, I know very little about his poetry, although he wrote a tremendous amount in his short life. Tell us about the poetry, or in particular the impact that the poetry had on society at the time, because it turned him into a terrific celebrity, didn't it?
That's right. We use the word Byronic now to mean a certain kind of moody exile, a kind of personality that comes from those poems, the early poems, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, the early lyrics, poems like Manfred and the Corsair. So there's that side of him. It's kind of a dark, angrier side. And then later in life, the more satiric, lighthearted side that we see in his epic Don Juan. So there's a couple different Byrons out there. His poetry is, as you say, a massive achievement, hard to know where to start. That's partly why I started with the letters, a way to get into that voice of Byron in his writing while also exploring the life.
And the poetry, which I think is somewhat neglected today, was not neglected at the time. As he published, a voracious public consumed his output.
That's right. After his trip to the Mediterranean, when he was as a young man, he came back and wrote Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, which was his first poem. He said, "I awoke and found myself famous" after it was published. And it was a poem about, as I say, a kind of moody wanderer, thinking about politics, thinking about his own life, thinking about the modern state of Europe. And it struck a chord with readers, partly, I think, because of his aristocratic status, writing for an increasingly widespread middle-class audience that wanted to hear what Lord Byron, as a disaffected young man, thought about both the present day of Europe and its history and his own emotional responses to it.
He travelled extensively and spent the last 8 years of his life outside of his native country. Did he go away for those last 8 years principally because of his private life?
That's right. He sort of sends himself into exile in 1816 after the separation from Lady Byron, which comes amidst speculations and rumors both of homosexual activity and incest with his half-sister Augusta, and those swirling rumors in Regency culture made the temperature sort of too hot for Byron to handle. He left in disgust, thinking he might come back later, but ended up getting involved with Italian politics and Italian people, and then Greece, as you say, and never returned to England after 1816.
He wrote an autobiographical memoir, which after his death was burned by his friends who thought it was too shocking to be allowed to survive. Do you think we've lost a lot, or do you think that that kind of replicated what's in the letters?
I think we've lost something, but it would be great to hear Byron's own voice, how he wanted to be remembered in terms of an autobiography. But as you say, the letters do a lot of that work. You get that racy, brilliant, kind of Quicksilver style, a confessional style that we probably characterize the memoir as well. And in a certain way, Don Juan, the great epic that he writes in the last years of his life, has some of that same energy. And so between the letters and Don Juan, I think we get the flavor and so much of the content of the memoir, although it is one of the great lost grails of literary history that memoir was burned. Maybe it will turn up someday. People did make copies of it. A few people read it and made copies, and they were told to burn those copies. But did they? We don't know. Maybe they'll be found in an attic in Yorkshire or something.
Ah, that would be a marvellous find, wouldn't it, for the future? Tell me a little bit about how you selected the letters. You've selected 10 and they cover his life, but presumably you were looking for, well, to reflect the different stage of his life, but also to hear a different voice at different times.
Exactly right. Yes, the first one is written when he's 19 at Cambridge, as you say, adjusting to that environment, and the last one from Missolonghi, Greece, just months before his death. So I had to pick letters that covered each of these various stages and locations of this well-traveled figure, catching him in different moods, different hinge points of his life, to different correspondents, because he, as we all do, performed a slightly different self, or in some cases a radically different self, depending on to whom he was writing. And so I wanted to give a flavor of that range while also having touchstone moments to hang the life upon.
So would you like to bring alive for us a moment? I mean, maybe it would be a romantic moment, for example.
Would you like me to read one of the letters? Is that what you think?
Well, a tiny piece, yeah.
Yeah, why don't I do that? If you give me just 1 second. There's this letter he writes from Venice, and he's writing about one of his Venetian mistresses, Margherita Cogni, and this is written to his publisher back in London. And I'll just read a bit of it. He's telling the story of their relationship. That she had a sufficient regard for me in her wild way, I had many reasons to believe. I will mention one. In the autumn one day, going to the Lido with my gondoliers, we were overtaken by a heavy squall, and the gondola put in peril, hats blown away, boat filling, oar lost, tumbling sea, thunder, rain in torrents, night coming, and wind increasing. On our return, after a tight struggle, I found her on the open steps of the Mocenigo Palace on the Grand Canal, with her great black eyes flashing through her tears, and the long dark hair which was streaming, drenched with rain, over her brows and breast. She was perfectly exposed to the storm, and the wind blowing her hair and dress about her tall, thin figure, and the lightning flashing round her, and the waves rolling at her feet, made her look like Medea alighted from her chariot, or a Sibyl of the tempest that was rolling around her, the only living thing within hail at that moment except ourselves. And it goes on like that. It's a bit long and very lively letter about that relationship. But you see how he could have been a great novelist as well. I mean, he really sets the scene.
That is a fantastic reading you gave us there. Thank you very much indeed. Andrew Stauffer, your book is Byron, A Life in 10 Letters. And we're going from one romantic, Lord Byron, to another shortly, because Stefan Kyriazis will be with me in a few minutes with his reviews of theatre and ballet. See you soon.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. It's going to be a cloudy day today. There'll be outbreaks of light rain and drizzle, and it's still a chilly feel for the time of year too. And looking at the picture for this morning, a lot of cloud across the UK, outbreaks of rain across many areas, just a bit of sunshine towards the southwest, and that remains so for the afternoon too, but this could trigger 1 or 2 showers as we move through into the evening time. Elsewhere, generally it stays cloudy for much of the day. Outbreaks of light rain and drizzle, and the wind's still coming in off the North Sea, so a chilly feel for many of us. Into the evening time, this rain will continue to push its way westward. Still a lot of low cloud behind it, some drizzle in places too. So a damp evening to come, and that takes us into Monday as well. It remains cloudy through Sunday night. Further outbreaks of light rain and drizzle in places, some low cloud leading to some foggy conditions over the higher ground, and temperatures again falling to around mid-single figures due to the cloud cover not falling too low at all. But it does mean another cloudy grey start to Monday. Outbreaks of rain and drizzle feeding in off the North Sea, particularly down these eastern areas, remaining quite damp for much of the day. Best of any brighter spells will be towards western coast, but even here it will remain largely cloudy through the day. Some showery rain for Northern Ireland too, and temperatures just about getting into double figures. See you soon.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Jeremy Hunt claimed last week that the National Health Service is the thing about which Britons are most proud. On the other hand, polls show a massive fall in public satisfaction. Will a play about its sponsoring minister, Nye Bevan, kindle their enthusiasm again? Stefan Kyriazis, were you inspired by Michael Sheen's portrayal of Anyarim Bevan?
I was. He's absolutely stunning, and it's all politics recently in the theatre, which is very much your thing. But there's a way of handling it so that it's not bashing you over the head, it's not too didactic, it's not lecturing. Michael Sheen is absolutely, unquestionably charismatic. So it opens with him. It's 1960. He's been operated on for an ulcer, comes around in his hospital room. And, of course, the point is made, it's a hospital that he had built. Not himself, but it was built under with his hands. But it was built under his initiatives. And he's there, very chipper, kind of going, you know, I'll be out of here soon. I'm not going anywhere. The only place I'm going is number 10. However, we know, retrospectively, and his wife, Jenny Lee, and his best friend, Archie Lush, know that it's actually stomach cancer. So he's in a lot of pain. But there are moments when Michael Sheen just looks out at the audience, and it's that star quality. You are drawn in, and that's vital for a story like this. And then what we have, it's been described a lot, and it's true, it's a little bit like The Singing Detective. So he's increasingly under a lot of morphine, he's increasingly unconscious, and he's sorting through his mind, going through the past. So the doctors and nurses around him become Winston Churchill, become his sister back in his childhood. Everything blurs in and out. The set is very simple, green hospital curtains, but beautifully done. So they can close all the way across and just leave him in his bed. They can separate out into a ward, but also they go up and down and create this kind of tiered effect of the House of Parliament when he's doing his different things, trying to get the NHS through, and also opposing Churchill during the war, which was he was the most hated man in Britain for a while. So it's a complex story. It's a really interesting story. It's a really important story. Beautifully acted. Sharon Small plays his wife. She's glorious as well. There's a lot going on. So it depends. It's, again, modern staging. And we've got this thing which I like and I'm a fan of and my guest enjoyed, movement. So people act, but they don't dance, but people kind of move in a pack, or they all move the same way, or they all tilt their head. So it creates a kind of atmosphere, and especially if he's hallucinating. We get one big musical number, Forget Your Troubles, Come On Be Happy, in a hospital ward with beds wheeling around and legs in the air and everything, which is fun. My guest didn't enjoy it. I thought it was really fun. But there are glorious bits where he goes back to his childhood and remembers the wonder of a public library. We forget everything that we're entitled to that we have now. And while he's doing that, he's always in his hospital pyjamas, but he's acting like a little boy magnificently. He's lifted up by all the other people. So it's dance, but it's also acting, memory, fantasy.
So you liked it. I thought you might be saying that it's quite difficult. I mean, you know, sorting out the NHS, what he had to do after the pledge had been made during the Second World War that there would be a National Health Service, he had to sort out all the bureaucracy. He had to go from a system where, you know, we had private surgeons to surgeons who were going to work in the National Health Service. And indeed, one of the things he did was to enable the surgeons to work both in the National Health Service and in the private sector. He said at the time, I stuffed their mouths with gold. Yes. Now, is that the sort of thing that we're going through in this play?
We're going through... I mean, I think the point that a lot of people have made, and I agree, is it's a little bit like the situation you have with a jukebox musical. It can get a little bit Wikipedia at times. You've got to get to his childhood, his father dying of black lung, problems with his family, early political days, all of this. And then when we get to the final NHS thing, it's done beautifully. Great big screens with these looming faces of kind of disembodied. It's almost a bit big brothery. Glorious. Yes, I'm interested. I went away and I heard other people saying, oh, I need to go and look that up. I went away interested, fascinated. I'm not sure that I quite got under it completely. I wanted a bit more.
Where's it playing?
This is on at the National Theatre, and it's on until May the 11th. It's also then transferring to the Wales Millennium Centre from May the 18th. OK. So a little bit of a tour.
So a good ticket. I think that would be in high demand. You've got some ballet for us again, Swan Lake.
We have more dance, and we've got, as always, a beautiful clip just to get you in the mood.
Magnificent, magnificent indeed. Looks like a standard choreography.
It is, but it's also, this is the Liam Scarlett, not Robin Hood, Liam Scarlett choreography, which is a newish, about 2012, 14, something like that. So yes, it always takes from the classical, from the Petipa and from the Russian origins. But I absolutely love this production. Number one, you got little glimpses there. The staging is gorgeous. I took a girlfriend with me and there was lots of gasping. The throne room set is jaw-dropping, a little bit how I imagine your bedroom. All Baroque, black and gold, drapes, everything.
Spot on.
I know,
Spot
I knew
on.
it. Absolutely glorious. But also, it's there's not a lot of all this walking around. Ballet can sometimes be a little bit of the Queen comes in, everybody bows, she walks around, then she makes some gestures about this, and it all goes on. And it can drag a bit, especially most ballets, the early sections. This goes in with dancing, absolutely stunning outside the palace gates, which are glorious. And then instead of these transitions or curtains coming down when we go to the lake, the prince, Vadim Muntagirov on opening night, who is sublime, he dances his lonely solo across the stage, and it all darkens and shadows, and you can't actually see really what's happening. But he dances through, and then as it brightens up, we're at the lake, and the moon comes up behind, and the whole show is like this. There's no time wasted, no movement wasted. Beautifully, beautifully choreographed, beautifully, as you can see, designed and dressed. And then at the heart of it, again on opening night, we have Marinella Nunez, who is going to be 42 next week. So it gives both of us hope. She's a little bit older than us, but she's been a principal since she was 20, and she is extraordinary. And I was reading another critic actually talking about some opera, but I noticed very, very much their first pas de deux is very slow. There was no coughing. And he said the same about an opera he was at. Yes, obviously we all cough, but I think people cough also when they're a little bit restless.
No, absolutely. When there's absolute silence, you know the audience is completely gripped.
You could have heard an absolute pin. It was beautiful.
Swan Lake, the Royal Ballet, obviously at the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden.
Also, yes, Royal Opera House until June, but also on in cinemas, and that's going to be in cinemas from April the 24th. So please, 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 if you can get tickets for that, go and see it.
And you'll just have a moment to talk about something else.
Yes, and then tonight there's a gala celebration at the Palladium, and just to bring up again, we mentioned it when he passed away, Bill Kenwright, one of the greatest promoters, producers in UK theatre, especially as we've been talking again, touring. He was such a huge supporter of touring productions, regional theatre. So there's a huge celebration of his life tonight. I just wanted to bring it up and mention it because the man deserves every respect and memory possible.
And did you want to mention Richard Hawley as well?
I did. I talked to Richard Hawley recently when I was at the opening for Standing at the Sky's Edge. And just what we're having, again, Bill Kenwright was very much theatre for the people. And actually Jenny Lee, Nye Bevan's wife, she was behind the Open University, the first arts minister. And again, all this about theatre outside London, theatre for the people, theatre for everybody. But talking to Richard Hawley very much, his show is about council estates, about the miners, about the unions, about strikes. It's quite anti-Thatcher in terms of what those people were going through at that time. But he was very clear talking to me as well that the show was not a rant. And he made the beautiful point, you need two wings to fly, left wing and right wing. And I just thought, that was a beautiful thought.
Stefan, you are full of beautiful thoughts. And you also bring us beautiful images. Thank you very much indeed, Stefan Kyriazis. You're watching Michael Portillo on GB News. This is Britain's news channel. That concludes the first hour of the programme. After the break, we will return with a debate about inheritance. Does anyone have a right to expect one? We'll also be talking about Donald Trump, the contribution of British Muslims to British life, and we will mark 10 years since the disappearance of that flight MH370. See you soon.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. Well, during the rest of today, it's going to be a rather cloudy and damp picture for most of us. That's all courtesy of this area of low pressure. It's not really going to go very far during the course of the next 24 hours. And with wind coming in off the North Sea, it's going to feel particularly chilly, especially along the coastline. So this afternoon, the main bulk of the rain will be lying across parts of East Anglia into the Midlands, Yorkshire, over towards parts of Northern Ireland too. Best of any sunshine up across the far north of Scotland, down towards Devon and Cornwall too, but here it may trigger a few showers. But in the brightness, temperatures reaching 11 or 12 degrees, but for most of us, it's going to feel pretty chilly for the time of year. Into the evening, the area of rain will gradually begin to peter out, but for most of us, it's really going to be a rather cloudy and damp night. Some mist and hill fog as well. And for most of us, with the cloud cover, it will be a frost-free night. Could just turn a little bit chilly up across the very far north of Scotland. So a grey, mild but murky start as we start the new working week on Monday. But most of us, it should be a drier day compared to Sunday. Still the risk of some rain affecting parts of western Scotland, maybe just at times across the very far east of England too, but sunshine unfortunately is going to be at a premium. Best of it really will be down towards Devon and Cornwall.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We have a ton of top prizes to be won in our spring giveaway. There's a massive £12,345 in tax-free cash to spend however you like, along with £500 in shopping vouchers for your favourite store, a games console, a pizza oven and a portable Sonos smart speaker. And the best news? You could be our next big winner, just like Phil.
Whoever wins it next is going to be as happy as I was, and they're going to get even more money this time round, so why wouldn't you go in the draw?
For your chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text prize to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task. This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon and welcome to the second hour of Sunday with Michael Portillo. Inheritance frequently causes division within families and presently appears to be vexing the country. A fiery article in this week's Telegraph warned chippy millennials and slacker Gen Zs that they shouldn't feel entitled to a legacy. But perhaps Generation Rent feels justified to inherit from my generation, given that we were usually in steady employment as we also steadily climbed the property ladder. We'll debate that in just a few minutes. As Donald Trump is the all but certain Republican nomination for this year's United States presidential election, I'll speak to one of his former communications directors, who now says that she'd rather see Joe Biden retain office. In Britain, an unedifying debate has ignited over government help to establish a Muslim war memorial. The week also brought the publication of a report from the Institute for the Impact of Faith on Life, which found that most Muslims wish to improve interfaith relations and feel more accepted in Britain than in other European countries. I'll also speak to the author of a report on London's housing problems ahead of the mayoral election in May. He has a simple message: build, build, build. And finally, at the end of the show, we will mark the 10-year anniversary of the disappearance of the Malaysian Airlines flight MH370. I'll speak to the husband of one of the passengers who was aboard the plane. He is himself an air traffic controller, and we'll see whether there are any lessons that can be learnt from the tragedy. All of that lies ahead, but first, your news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Thanks, Michael. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story. The Princess of Wales has thanked the public for their support as the first photo of her was published after her abdominal surgery. The image, posted on social media to mark Mother's Day, was taken by the Prince of Wales in Windsor earlier this week. Sitting down, Princess Catherine is surrounded by her children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis. She was admitted to hospital on January 16th and left 2 weeks later after a planned operation. She's expected to return to her royal duties after Easter. Meanwhile, police are questioning a man after his car crashed into the gates of Buckingham Palace. The incident happened at 2:30 on Saturday morning. Our royal correspondent Cameron Walker has more.
We understand the gates were damaged, and social media footage or images shows armed police swooping on the car. We know that the individual driving the car was arrested. The gates are also being repaired as well. What we don't know is the exact circumstances as to why the car crashed into those gates. We haven't been given any details of a motive by police, or indeed whether or not it was accidental. Metropolitan Police perhaps will give us more details later on today. But as I said, no members of the royal family were in residence, so hopefully the only thing that is damaged is indeed the gates, which of course are being hastily repaired.
And in other royal news, Princess Diana's brother, Charles Spencer, says he was sexually abused from the age of 11 at boarding school. In an extract from his memoir published on the Mail on Sunday, Earl Spencer says he was targeted by a female member of staff at Maidwell Hall in Northamptonshire, leaving him with lifelong demons. In a statement, the school said it's difficult to read about the practices which were sadly sometimes believed to be normal and acceptable at that time. Pro-Palestinian protesters are being warned they could be lending credence to extremists. The Community Secretary is urging people to question which groups are organising the marches. Michael Gove, who's due to publish a new official definition of extremism, told the Sunday Telegraph there's no excuse for ignorance and good-hearted demonstrators need to be aware they risk fuelling hate and intimidation. A group of mothers are staging a hunger strike outside Parliament. The 5-day protest aims to draw attention to parents who can't afford to eat and are skipping meals to feed their children. Their list of demands include enforcing free school meals and universal credit to guarantee life's essentials. MPs are due to address the issue on Tuesday. A number of bodies have been removed from a funeral director in Yorkshire as part of a police investigation. Cordons remain in place at 3 branches of legacy independent funeral directors after Humberside Police received reports of concern for the care of the deceased. The bodies have been taken to local authority mortuary in Hull, while they try to establish whether any criminal offences have been committed. Police have set up a direct line for anyone who might be affected. It's emerged that Boris Johnson held a meeting with Venezuela's controversial leader, Nicolás Maduro. The former Prime Minister flew to the country last month for what the Sunday Times says were secret talks with the president. Venezuela has experienced a severe political and economic crisis since Nicolás Maduro was re-elected in 2018 after judges banned his primary opponents from competing. There has since been strong international pressure for Venezuela to hold a free and fair election. Cars that don't comply with London's ULEZ rules can now be donated to Ukraine under the scrappage scheme. Mayor Sadiq Khan says from next week, drivers who give up their vehicles will be able to apply for grants of up to £2,000. Kyiv's Mayor Vitaly Klitschko reportedly suggested the idea of exporting the cars in a letter to his counterpart. A charity will facilitate the move. The donated vehicles will be used to support humanitarian and medical needs. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Michael.
Thank you very much, Sophia Winsler. Where there's a will, there's a way, goes the old proverb, but it surely wasn't intended to encourage younger generations to rely on legacies. Bitter intergenerational disputes can arise over inheritance. Do we have the right to expect to receive one from relations? Do we boomers owe it to the millennials to pass them our wealth? To debate this, I'm joined by two men who have pulled themselves up by their own bootstraps. Lord Daniel Moylan, a Conservative life peer in the House of Lords, and the commentator and journalist Benjamin Butterworth. Benjamin Butterworth, one of the things that happens when generations pass money down to another generation is that this entrenches inequality. Is that something that we should be bothered about?
I mean, it's certainly a problem with a country that relies on inheritance, because then you do run the danger that people who aren't from families with property wealth, basically, will be disadvantaged for another generation. But I think ultimately the biggest gap we have in terms of inequality these days is between the generations. Because what you've seen, compared with my grandparents, who have both passed on, who've passed on in the last few years, compared to your grandparents' generation, is a massive change in the value of assets like property and how far the average income goes. In fact, for context, a house has not been as out of proportion with average incomes today since the 1860s. So that's the kind of situation we're dealing with. And so what you've got is a generation that has vastly inflated the value of basic things like a home at the cost of millennials. And so that's why I think it's absolutely essential that they understand to pass that down, preferably before they die, because obviously, as the story in the Telegraph about not passing the inheritance down, you know, most people these days will be in their 50s, maybe their 60s, maybe older by the time their parents die.
I entirely understand your argument about the inequality that has arisen between different generations, but I think some people might have been quite shocked to hear you describe that as the greatest inequality. Surely still the greatest inequality is between those who find it a great struggle to live and some of the people that we're talking about who probably sooner or later will get themselves on the housing ladder, but, you know, who would like to get there quicker by having some enormous legacy from their property-owning parents.
I think the scale of the problem of generational equality is much bigger. And you see this reflected in people's political voting patterns. You know, when you were at the forefront of politics, the biggest suggester of how someone would vote would be their class. But today it's their generation, it's their age. If someone's over 65, they're still a bit more likely to vote Tory, though even that's fading a little. But people under 40 are overwhelmingly likely to vote Labour, and that's been the case for 5-10 years now. And that's because of the inequality of access to wealth. And the truth is that, you know, the average house price in this country, depending on where in the country you are, is 4 to 6 times higher now than what it would have been in the early to mid-90s. But we know that incomes in the last 15 years are barely back at where they were 15 years ago. And so you've got a generation that has been cut off from achieving their aspirations. And I think that's what a lot of people of the boomer generation don't recognise. You know, I work hard, most of my peers work hard, but the ability to transfer that into assets and into quality of life is much harder.
Daniel Moylan, do you buy this argument? Do you think that this hard done by generation of people who've not had the luck that we had, getting onto the housing ladder fairly early, that they should feel entitled to get a legacy?
Well, Michael, I feel I'm here under false representations. I thought I was coming to hear a tribute from Benjamin to the older generation. Remember how we were brought up? We had no smartphones. We were lucky to have a plastic toy. Most families only had one holiday a year, and that was usually in Blackpool or Weston-super-Mare. None of us, well, very few of us had the chance to go to university. I was one of the lucky ones. None of us blew £30,000 or plus on a wedding. And indeed, we children were so oppressed that we were actually expected to give up our seats on the bus and the tube to older folk. In exchange for all of these privations, And after a lifetime of contributions, what do we get? We get a state pension of about £11,000 a year, and a lot of people don't get that because they haven't got the contribution record. They get less, many of them women, and that's what we get, one of the lowest in the civilised world. And as for property prices, I'll give myself as an example. I've lived in the same place for 28 years. And it has gone up in price enormously over that time. But what does that mean to me? It means nothing at all to me. I'm not going to sell it. And if I did sell it, I'd only have to buy some place which had also gone up in price. It's my home. It doesn't make me any richer that I'm still living in the same place I've been living for 28 years.
The question
and the fact is, oh yes, well, it's true that Benjamin and his generation might get some benefit from that when I die, but the fact that he wants to get his grubby mitts on my home already, where am I going to live? Where's he going to put me? Well, am I going to be put off into some sort of home or whatever, where I have to live in a cabin somewhere on a beach? Grubbing for vegetables in the Strand.
Bravo, Daniel. That was a terrific performance.
This is terrible, Michael.
But I'd like to know how you approach the question of your death. I mean, it seems to me there could be three possible approaches.
Sorry, why is that being put to me on an ageist basis?
I think you're younger than I am. I put it to you on this basis, that you could, on your death, allow your wealth tied up in your house of 28 years, you could pass that to someone that you choose to pass it to. You could, on the other hand, pass it to an institution, for example, or some charitable cause, or you could make another decision, which Benjamin hinted at, which is that you could seek to release some money during your lifetime if there was someone that you thought could benefit from your wealth today. Take us through how you would approach those questions.
Well, a lot of people do the last. A lot of people do the last, and I'm not sure it's actually necessarily very wise. What it does is, I've seen it happen, not to me, I've seen it happen where families actually start to put pressure on older members, either to sell up and move out, or to take out one of these hugely expensive, and I think probably financially not very advantageous, equity release schemes, so that they can have some money now for whatever their purpose is. I think actually the sensible thing is patience and managing your own affairs rather than trying to leech off the elderly, who, as I say, in most cases have received no advantage whatsoever from the fact that their property has gone up in value, because it's still exactly the same home they moved into, sometimes decades ago, and they live in it.
Benjamin, let's raise the sort of ethical point. I think it is really morally decadent for people to live their lives in the expectation that at some point they're going to be showered with money by the death of an older relative. I mean, that must sort of eat away at your ability to look after yourself, your motivation. I've seen people, I've found it quite depressing, that their life plan has been, oh, well, in 10 years' time, Aunt so-and-so will die, and then after that, after 15 years, Uncle somebody else, and that is how I'm going to finance my life. I mean, that is morally decadent, is it not?
I mean, look, I was raised by my grandparents who have both passed, and I certainly never asked them about what my inheritance would be, and I certainly never pressured them to pass that down before they went. But I think the problem with your argument is that we live in a country whereby the ability to get on the housing ladder, which is the biggest financial challenge that any normal person faces, is simply unsurmountable in a lot of situations without that inheritance. And so it's not that they're acting with bad ethics, it's that their most plausible route to that financial security that not so long ago was taken for granted is to get it through inheritance. Now, you referenced it earlier about inequality between the very poorest and the very richest. That ought to be the big problem, but this is the most common problem. And I just make one other point, because of course, Daniel worked hard, but the fact is that in the last 10 years, the generation that has gained the most wealth has been the baby boomers, has been the pensioners, and the wealth of those under 35 has proportionately fallen. So they're getting richer even when not working.
I wonder whether we've been realistic about this, Daniel, at all, because people are now living so long that when we talk about children inheriting, we're very often talking about people who are in their 60s. I mean, far too late to help them to get onto the property ladder.
Well, I think you make a very good point about moral decadence. There's nothing new about it. Benjamin talked about the price of houses in the 1860s. Dickens' novels are full of young men who are living on their expectations, and they're borrowing money. on the basis of their expectations. And it's very interesting that for Dickens, all of these young men are baddies. He regards them all as morally decadent. The good guys in Dickens' novels are the ones who get on by their own hard work and efforts and pull themselves up. And then when the inheritance comes, if it does come, then it's an uncovenanted bonus in their lives. They haven't been chewing themselves up, expecting it all the way through.
The two of you are examples of hard work because you've turned up on a Sunday lunchtime in order to debate this very important issue, Lord Moylan and Benjamin Butterworth. After the break, we're going to go to the United States for a reaction to Donald Trump's having all but sewn up the Republican nomination for president, and we'll explore the contribution of Muslims to British society.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Well, to cut a very long story short, I was the chaplain in a school, and a pupil asked me to preach on how come they were told they had to accept the LGBT stuff in a Christian school. I thought that was a fair question. So I said, ultimately, no, you don't have to accept anybody else's ideas. You make up your own minds. And so on topics like the marriage being between a man and a woman, biological sex being real, gender identity not making perfect sense, therefore can't be entirely true. I said, you may adopt the church's position on that and respect the people you disagree with, but you make up your own mind, for which, as you say, I was reported to Prevent, the anti-terror watchdog, secular safeguarding authorities, the Teaching Regulation Agency, Disclosure and Barring Service, all of whom eventually cleared me, but I lost my job at the school, and that's why there's legal action ongoing.
It's an incredibly powerful sermon, to be fair. What do you make of Justin Welby in his current role? I've obviously rattled off quite a few things there. I mean, you've had personal experience of feeling quite abandoned. What's your view on his position?
Well, he's doing a very difficult job, in fairness to him. My personal view is perhaps he's not doing the best job of it. I'll be diplomatic about it. In a sense, I'm on the wrong side of things as far as he's concerned, I guess. Not a word of support, not a whisper from anyone in the Church of England's hierarchy for someone simply saying, you may accept the Church of England's own teaching. And I can't quite see how he can square that in his own head, but he would have to answer to that himself, I guess.
I mean, the irony is that, though this is obviously through no fault of your own, the Church of England has recently baptised people who have gone on to not just be referred to Prevent, but actually commit acts of terrorism. Meanwhile, you were referred to Prevent for essentially teaching.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. The United States is set for a rerun of the 2020 election as Donald Trump has all but secured the Republican nomination for president and will probably be running against the incumbent Democrat Joe Biden. Trump's last remaining rival, Nikki Haley, suspended her campaign following a slew of defeats in the Super Tuesday primaries. She did enough, however, for Trump not to have enough delegates just yet to be confirmed, and she held off from endorsing the former president, saying that it was for him to win the trust of his detractors. One detractor served as White House Communications Director under Donald Trump back in 2019. Stephanie Grisham joins me now. Stephanie, welcome to GB News. What was it that you saw in the Trump White House that makes you today a Joe Biden voter?
Well, good morning, Michael. You know, I started out with Donald Trump in 2015 when he first announced that he was running for president. And I thought he was going to be somebody who would shake up our Republican Party. As I worked for him and for Melania Trump, I was press secretary and director of communications. And I just saw a side of him that it was beyond disappointing. He was more about enriching himself. He was more about worried about how he could get reelected rather than what was good for our country. We had, of course, COVID hit, and there were a lot of missteps there. So it was something over time. It was very hard for me because I was very, very close to him and to his wife, Melania. And then on January 6th, when we had people attacking our Capitol and he refused to, ask them to call it stop or be peaceful with their protests, I just had to resign. That was kind of my red line.
The argument is made, however, that when Donald Trump was president of the United States, Vladimir Putin was sort of kept within his box. North Korea was much less aggressive. China was restrained. Hamas did not attack Israel. Now, Donald Trump would claim that when he was president, he had that impact on some of these key players in world affairs. Do you buy that?
I do buy that to a degree. I think that, a lot of the policies that Donald Trump implemented were good policies. And, I did agree with him that other countries within NATO should be paying their fair share to help in defending the rest of the world. But at the expense of, glorifying dictators, I think is a real problem. And I don't think that just because Joe Biden is president now, we're having all of these issues.
You've described Donald Trump as being an egotist and a selfish man and so on. There are quite a lot of politicians who might be described in that way by people who work for them. Are you telling us that he really is beyond the pale in these qualities that surely many others in politics share?
I could not agree with you more. I think in order to be a politician, you have to have some level of ego. So I definitely agree. No, this is more of a corrupt ego. This is more of a narcissist type of an ego where he can do nothing wrong, and no amount of good advice from really good people who truly love the country would sway him. It was more about, again, enriching his own personal business. He had his own children working at the White House. As I don't know if you've paid attention, but his daughter-in-law is now a co-chair of our Republican National Committee. So it's more about kind of corrupting and taking over rather than looking at what's best for the country. And I don't think that any amount of ego should have that kind of power.
Donald Trump is an extraordinary campaigner. Many polls suggest that he is ahead in the swing states. The president, Joe Biden's ratings at the moment are pretty low. And a lot of people share the concern that Donald Trump is voicing about immigration across the United States southern border. Give us a reaction to those thoughts, please.
Absolutely. I share in the immigration issue that we have here in the United States. And that was one of the things that attracted me to working for Donald Trump, was his stance on immigration. Not maybe his rhetoric with regard to immigration, but certainly his stance. Our country, and now the Democrat Party in our country, has seen that we have a real problem with immigration. We did have the Democrats and Republicans in our Congress come together and put together a very tough immigration proposal that could have been signed into law. However, Donald Trump stopped it just so that he would have an issue to campaign by, which goes back to my example of doing things for him and not what's best for the country. Now, Joe Biden does have a problem. He's got a messaging problem, and he's got a lot of things happening in our country that people are blaming him for. I think now that we have a race, though, in the general election, and it will be between Biden and Trump, we'll kind of start to see those numbers change a bit. When you're in the Republican side of things, and Donald Trump has a very strong base in our Republican Party, I think that's how he managed to get through, and somebody who's a little bit more center-leaning like Nikki Haley wouldn't get through. So now I think we have a clean slate with the general election, and we'll see kind of what happens.
Stephanie Grisham, thank you very much for joining us. It's probably quite early where you are, so I'm particularly grateful. The Chancellor of the Exchequer prefaced his budget speech with an announcement that the government would provide £1 million towards building a war memorial to those Muslim servicemen who died for Britain during the two world wars. The announcement happened to coincide with a new report from the Institute for the Impact of Faith on Life, which found that by comparison with other groups in Britain, a greater proportion of Muslims feel positive about the nation's future. More than three-quarters also wish for greater interfaith relations. Muslim respondents in the report praised Britain's tolerance, particularly in comparison to other European countries. Jake Scott is one of the report's authors and joins me now. Welcome, Jake. Very good to see you. We also see in your report more commitment to family amongst Muslim families, more commitment to community, to charitable giving, things like that. Do you want to give us a summary of what you got out of this survey?
Absolutely. So when it comes to family and taking care of elderly relatives, British Muslims typically say that there's a greater duty to care for elder relatives. We're talking 44% of British Muslims compared to sort of the high 20s of the average population, of the general population. And when we spoke to individual interview participants, a great number of them emphasised hadiths, teachings in Islam, the Quran itself, speakings of the Prophet Muhammad that emphasise the importance of caring for your elderly relatives, largely as a reciprocal relationship. You know, they care for you when you're young, they raise you up, and then when they start to age and can't provide for themselves, you have to step in and take on that more caring role.
Do you get a feel from the survey about the state of integration? So were the Muslims who were responding to you, or in what percentage, were they people who felt they were integrated into Britain in the broadest sense, or were some of them indicating that they were living within communities within Britain, which might have been somewhat separate from other communities?
So this was something that we actually explored in our panel that launched the report. So the report was published last Tuesday on the 5th. We had a panel composed of two Sunni Muslims, a Shia Muslim from the Dawidi Bohra community, and an Ahmadiyya Muslim from Kent. And almost all of them emphasised this lack of insulation in British Muslim communities. So a lot of the, all of the panellists talked about helping local communities regardless of faith, doing litter picks, all the way up to food bank contributions, local charity involvement, and something that they're really keen to emphasise whenever you speak to the British Muslims, especially in the research, is that insulation and an insular idea of British Muslims is completely inaccurate. So I think this is really, really emphasised in the statistic you mentioned, that more than three-quarters want to see greater interfaith relations. Roughly 22% think the right amount is being done, which indicates that we're on the right path. But I think, British Muslims in general feel as though they contribute to society and they want that to be recognised.
In my last question, I may have exhibited a prejudice. Did you find that your Muslim respondents felt that they were the victims of some prejudice?
What was really encouraging when we asked questions about this was that a significant number said no, that when you go around Britain, British people are very tolerant, very respectful. They ask questions out of curiosity rather than prejudice. And I think the only time where British Muslim respondents were indicating negativity was regarding the media. And there are studies that show that overwhelmingly the British media negatively portrays British Muslims and Islam in general. There was a study, I think roughly 70% of headlines are negative. And that really is the misunderstanding that British Muslims would like to see addressed. They don't think, broadly speaking, that misunderstanding lies in the British public. They think it comes largely from the media.
We have this problem with the word Islam and then the word Islamism. I think I understand the huge difference between the two, but I wonder whether the public does. Did your report in any way touch upon that?
Well, that tends to be a question of over things like radicalism and extremism. And I think what's interesting is if we look at the case studies that we looked at in the report, a significant number of British Muslim charities and organisations actively combat extremism. There's a number of organisations that try to encourage mosques to report people who might be exhibiting extremist behaviour in the same way that British Muslims generally don't feel that bad about Prevent. They're quite respectful of it if they've heard of it. And they ask that the local community contributes to anti-extremism efforts.
An intriguing finding was that some of your Muslim respondents thought that things were better here than in other European countries. How would they know that?
Well, what was really encouraging was that in terms of the survey that we completed at the beginning of the report, only 40% were born in the United Kingdom in terms of British Muslims. That means that 2/3 were born abroad. And a significant number of those came from European nations. And when we conducted the interviews, by chance, we didn't go out to seek people born abroad. By chance, we spoke to a number of people born in and lived in, say, France, Germany, Norway, Denmark, comparable European nations. And they say, there's just no comparison. You know, in terms of how people treat Muslims in European nations, they stare, they make comments, they ask rude questions, whereas compared to here, the broad experience is that people are genuinely, positively curious. That's not to say there's not areas for improvement. There were, unfortunately, stories such as one woman said that when she wears hijab, that people tend to assume she's less intelligent, and likewise, when people wear religious dress, they tend to experience more negativity. But by and large, the response was positive.
What a very fascinating piece of work. I think that really helps us to understand the situation. Jake Scott, thank you for coming in and talking about that. After the break, we'll discuss how to build more houses in London. And we will remember the tragic disappearance of Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 10 years ago. First, though, an update on the main headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Thanks, Michael. It's 12:31. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your headlines. The Princess of Wales has thanked the public for their support as a photo of her was published after her abdominal surgery to mark Mother's Day. Sitting down, Princess Catherine is surrounded by her children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis. She was admitted to hospital on January 16th and left 2 weeks later after a planned operation. She's expected to return to her royal duties after Easter. Pro-Palestinian protesters are being warned they could be lending credence to extremists. The community secretary is urging people to question whether groups that are organising the marches. Michael Gove, who's due to publish a new official definition of extremism, told the Sunday Telegraph there's no excuse for ignorance and good-hearted demonstrators need to be aware they risk fuelling hate and intimidation. A number of bodies have been removed from a funeral director in Yorkshire as part of a police investigation. Cordons remain in place at 3 branches of legacy independent funeral directors after Humberside Police received reports of concern for care of the deceased. The bodies have been taken to the local authority mortuary in Hull while they try to establish whether any criminal offences have been committed. A group of mothers are staging a hunger strike outside Parliament. The 5-day protest aims to draw attention to parents who can't afford to eat and are missing meals to feed their children. Their list of demands include enforcing free school meals, universal credit and to guarantee life's essentials. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now, Michael will be back after the short break.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
President versus the Prince. Wow, what a story, Jenny. And this basically could mean Donald Trump rummaging around in these allegations in Spare about Prince Harry's drug taking, and it may affect his future residency plans. And of course, lest we forget, Meghan was very outspoken of her disdain for Trump when he was voted in. Jenny, this story really gets the juices flowing.
Yes. Well, Donald Trump, I think most people would accept, is probably quite a vindictive man. And he is a law unto himself. And he's made it very clear that he regards Harry and Meghan as being completely on their own if he becomes president. Thus far, they've been somewhat, I suppose, protected by the Biden administration. There is a group, a conservative group, who are trying to force the publication of the application that Harry filled in for his visa when he moved to America. And you know, the rules and laws on drug taking are quite intense over there. And the question is, did Harry say, as he did in his book Spare, that he had taken quite a considerable number of drugs. Did he say that on his visa application? But Trump has made a lot of quite unpleasant noises saying that he'll be on his own and it could threaten his residency in the United States.
California, the public enemy number one of Donald Trump, actually make the Sussexers more popular.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Martin. I think so. You know, they will be seen as victims of Trump, and their liberal credentials will be feted and celebrated, as they are already, I suppose, in California. So they could become new heroes and heroine of modern-day politics. So we will have to wait and see. But Trump has definitely got it in for.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Earlier, we were discussing ways to usher more young people onto the housing ladder. And chief amongst those, surely, it must be to build more homes. Well, ahead of the London mayoral election in May, a new report from the think tank Britain Remade explores ways to boost house building in the nation's capital, where average house prices are now 12.5 times the national income. Ben Hopkinson co-authored the report and joins me now, and I'm so grateful that you've come back on the programme in the middle of your Sunday. So is there a way to build more homes in London?
Yes, absolutely. And the kind of chief ability for the London Mayor to do that is in the London Plan. And the winner of the next May election has a huge opportunity here to deliver up to 900,000 new homes over the course of 15 years. Through a number of different ways. Chief among them, most exciting, is estate renewal.
Tell us about estate renewal, then.
So a lot of London's post-war housing estates are not dense at all. They're only about 20% as dense as some of London's most loved neighbourhoods, like Marylebone or Maida Vale. And because of this, you can build up more homes on the estates. And because the cost of building homes in London is a lot less than the cost of homes, there's that surplus value there that you can then use to provide the existing residents of these estates warmer, new, bigger flats, so they're happy, whilst also providing new homes for residents, which will lower the cost of housing and bring more people into the capital.
When you say estates, do you mean council estates, or do you mean estates that were built in the private sector? As where I was brought up in North London, estates built by the builders Lang in the 1930s. We're talking about those sorts of estates as well.
It's mostly council estates, and our modelling was based just off of council-owned properties, because that's easier for them to begin the process of doing an estate renewal project.
Mm-hmm. So, tell me about where the money gets released and when the money gets released. So somebody has to finance tearing down buildings, putting up new buildings in the short term, but you're saying that in the medium term or whatever, because the sale value of these houses is so great, the money comes back to the person who put the money in the first place, to the investor. Tell us how that works.
Yes, so obviously it takes a little bit of money initially to begin construction before you're able to sell some of the new flats. But once you sell those new flats, because the price of housing in London is 12.5 times income, average properties are £600,000. That's a lot of money that then goes back to the councils that start these projects. And then they can use that to fund increasing social housing provision, if they'd like, or if they're able to lobby, they can use it for other council goals, like lowering council tax, for example.
I suppose the councils will say that they don't have any money. I mean, is this a proposal on which you could borrow money?
I think you'd have to update the ways that councils could borrow money. But one of the things that we've proposed is that the mayor could look into climate funding for this, because a lot of London's existing social housing properties are very old. They've not meeting the current energy efficiency standards. So by building new estates, you can allow the new properties to be a lot more energy efficient. So that could unlock a lot of funding if you have a green lens on it.
You also suggest that the route that you're proposing bypasses most of NIMBYism. Tell me about that.
Yes, so a few of these estate renewal projects have already been run, and the mayor currently requires a ballot of existing residents. And the ballots, right now, you get 80 or 90% of residents in favour, because they're getting new properties, they're larger, they're nicer. So they're really excited about these opportunities. And I think we can really expand the number of estates all around London. And I'm sure the existing residents will be clamouring so that they can get new, nice homes to live in.
I think apart from estate renewal, you also think there are some brownfield sites. I think you mentioned, for example, Old Oak Common, where this mega railway station is being built. There is some land available there, is there potentially?
Yes, so Old Oak Common right now, which is going to be the terminus of HS2 when it opens soon-ish, is going to, well, right now the site is just surrounded by single-story warehouses and car rental return places and self-storage facilities. And it's actually illegal, banned by the London plan, to build housing on this. And I think once HS2 opens, it's a great opportunity to make the most of the railway by building homes right near the station and changing the use of this land. And that could deliver 185,000 new homes at nice, gentle densities.
Another complaint that is made very often is that the private house builders just have life too easy at the moment. They don't want to build a lot of houses because they make a lot of profit out of building very few. Is there anything you could do to stimulate the private sector?
Well, I think mainly it's just allowing them to build. I don't think that the housing developers would turn down the opportunity to create new neighbourhoods. And it also, because the price of housing is so expensive, you can add stipulations like design codes to make really nice, livable neighbourhoods that fit in with the current architectural styles of a local area.
Well, that is very, very interesting. Gives us some hope. Thank you very much for coming in,
yes,
Ben Hopkinson. After the break, we'll remember the disappearance of Malaysian Airlines flight MH370, which occurred exactly 10 years ago.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast on the Meteorist. Well, looking ahead to the new working week, it's going to remain fairly changeable across the country, but increasingly mild. As we end this weekend, we still got low pressure in charge, and with winds coming in from the east, it's still feeling pretty chilly out there. The rain, what we have seen today, will gradually weaken as the night goes on, but for most of us it's going to be a rather cloudy and murky night. But with the cloud cover, it will be frost-free as we go into the small hours of Monday morning. Chilliest the conditions up across the very far north of Scotland. And in the south, temperatures not falling much lower than around 6 or 7 degrees. So Monday morning is going to start off on a rather grey and damp note across the country. And really, as we go through the course of the day, sunshine's going to be at a premium. Best of it down towards Devon and Cornwall. Channel Islands also not doing too badly. But for most of us, it is going to be a drier day. Not completely dry. We will see some rain, especially across western Scotland. Maybe at times across the very far east of England too. Temperatures a little bit up compared to Sunday. Temperatures in the southwest could just reach 12 degrees. Into Tuesday, we see another band of rain beginning to spread in from the southwest, and that really sets us up for a bit of a northwest-southeast split as we go into the middle part of the week. Northwestern part seeing further rain at times, but in the southeast, turning increasingly mild.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's Mother's Day, which is obviously a time to celebrate our mums. Here's a little package that we've got to show you on the question of Mother's Day.
3, 2, 1, go!
It's Mothering Fun Day in Harrogate, a free inflatable event for mums and children to win top Mother's Day themed prizes. The Dash and Grab game is hosted by Harrogate Improvement District with the aim of boosting sales for businesses in the town this weekend.
I think at the moment it's really important to support local businesses because we're in a cost of living crisis. There's challenges around the budget was announced this week, so there's challenges around business rates, around rent that businesses pay. So every penny that people can support local businesses and national retailers really does matter. So whether it's Harrogate or whether it's other town or city centre, it's really important now more than ever to support your local town. So Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas, summer holidays, it's just a really good time to support businesses to increase footfall, increase spend and just celebrate those people that matter to you.
Bouncing with joy. Mums and kids here enjoy the tradition of Mother's Day. It's a special occasion to honour and appreciate mothers for their love, care and hard work.
Well, I think it's nice. I think mums often do a lot of stuff, quite thankless stuff, don't they? So, yeah, it's nice to be recognised.
I'm going to be able to spend it with my mum and my partner's mum, but also this one as well. So we're going to have a really nice day together celebrating Harrogate.
And it's going to be really fun because it's about loving your mum. It's a happy Mother's Day and we wanted to celebrate for our Mother's Day. She looks after us. I need going to the shops and getting her some chocolate. It shows her that she's really special and we all love her, so it's just nice to have a special day to celebrate her.
With shoppers in Britain expected to spend £1.7 billion on Mother's Day this year, the celebration is a triumph for trade as well as a fun time for families. Anna Riley, GB News, Harrogate.
It's 10 years since the Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 disappeared from the radar while on a flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. The disappearance of the plane remains one of the greatest mysteries in the history of aviation. The investigators believe that they have enough information to be able to locate the aircraft somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean. The competing theories about what happened to the flight are now the subject of a new BBC documentary, Why Planes Vanish: The Hunt for MH370. Amongst those interviewed are Nathan Vilayudin, whose wife Anne Daisy was on board MH370, and he joins me now. Nathan, thank you very much for coming on GB News. What was your reaction when you found that the search for the plane had been called off? Alas, it looks like our connection there to Malaysia has not worked out. We're going to try and catch up with Nathan in just a moment. Dawn Neeson's here. You're going to be on after me.
I am.
What have you got up your sleeve?
Wouldn't you like to know? It's always a treat to follow you, Mr. Portillo. We are having a loved-up show today because it is Mother's Day, and I'm in the dog's house with mine, I have to admit, because I'm not at lunch with her today, and I should be. So we've got lots of nice tributes to mums coming up, and we've got some dogs as well, some cute dogs as well, so we're having some fun with that. We've also got a special royal exclusives, if you like, on Princess Catherine and that picture that's been issued today, the Mother's Day picture. So there's some interesting things on that one we're talking about, and also Liz Truss and George Galloway. An unholy combination, but yes, we've got a couple of good stories on those lined up as well.
We have this photograph for Mother's Day of the Princess of Wales. First of all, is it being said that this has been taken very recently?
Well, you know what? The interesting thing with this is your immediate reaction now is the fact that you don't think it has been. And
No, I'm simply asking.
Yeah, I know. I mean, but that's my reaction. It shouldn't be. My reaction should be, what a lovely picture. She looks very happy. The children look very happy.
She looks very well.
She did look very well. And that is after being so quiet since her surgery in the end of December, wasn't it now? And it's like, well, is it a recent picture or not? And that I didn't want to think that. I just wanted to appreciate it as a nice Mother's Day picture. But there's lots of questions being asked, including, Michael, why she isn't wearing her wedding rings. Didn't notice, did you?
No, I don't.
No,
I don't
I
notice
know.
things like that.
But she often takes her engagement ring off, the one that Princess Diana used to wear, the big one. She often takes that off when she's playing sport and things like that. But she's not wearing any of her wedding rings. Which is curious.
Well, let's just hope that the Princess of Wales is in fine fettle. You sometimes mention what I'm wearing. You're wearing a really beautiful, may I say, Thatcheresque suit.
Thank you.
Today.
Electric blue. I always try and compliment. I was watching you on Camilla's show this morning. I thought, right, I'm going to wear something that brings out your wonderful suit as well. So you set a very high bar, Mr. Portillo, and I'm just trying to keep up the tradition on a Sunday afternoon.
Is your mother far away, may I ask? You can't get to lunch with her today?
No, she's only out in Essex, so in theory I should be there with her, but I have a very competitive sister who's organised lunch and is now having lunch with my mum, and I'm not. Sorry, Mum.
I want to say that I'm very sorry that line to Nathan Valayadan was down. I'm very grateful to Dawn. I'm very grateful to all my guests who've come in today and talked to me down the line. I will be back next Sunday. I look forward to it very much. Until then, bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast on the Meteorist. Well, looking ahead to the new working week, it's going to remain fairly changeable across the country, but increasingly mild. As we end this weekend, we still got low pressure in charge, and with winds coming in from the east, it's still feeling pretty chilly out there. The rain, what we have seen today, will gradually weaken as the night goes on, but for most of us it's going to be a rather cloudy and murky night. But with the cloud cover, it will be frost-free as we go into the small hours of Monday morning. Chilliest the conditions up across the very far north of Scotland. And in the south, temperatures not falling much lower than around 6 or 7 degrees. So Monday morning is going to start off on a rather grey and damp note across the country. And really, as we go through the course of the day, sunshine's going to be at a premium. Best of it down towards Devon and Cornwall. Channel Islands also not doing too badly. But for most of us, it is going to be a drier day. Not completely dry. We will see some rain, especially across western Scotland. Maybe at times across the very far east of England too. Temperatures a little bit up compared to Sunday. Temperatures in the southwest could just reach 12 degrees. Into Tuesday, we see another band of rain beginning to spread in from the southwest, and that really sets us up for a bit of a northwest-southeast split as we go into the middle part of the week. Northwestern part seeing further rain at times, but in the southeast, turning increasingly mild.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
We're springing into spring and giving you the chance to win the seasonal essentials. First, there's an incredible £12,345 in tax-free cash to be won, plus a spring shopping spree with £500 in shopping vouchers to spend in the store of your choice. And finally, a garden gadget package to enjoy, including a handheld games console, a portable smart speaker and a pizza oven. For your chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task. This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome to GB News Sunday. Happy Mother's Day. I hope you're having the best Sunday ever. Thank you for joining us this lunchtime. I'm Dawn Neeson, and for the next 2 hours, I'll be keeping you on company on TV, online and on digital radio. Cracking show for you. Now, it includes Michael Gove, sorry about that, but Michael Gove is warning pro-Palestine protesters that they risk rubbing shoulders with extremists. He says some pro-Palestine events have been organised by extremist organisations. I'm asking, though, is Gove right? Then the man who's set to become our first anti-Muslim hatred czar has reportedly quit because of all the hate he received before he even started. Does the UK need an anti-Muslim hatred czar, though? And a man holding a banner calling Hamas terrorists was arrested at a pro-Palestine march yesterday. Police say he was arrested for an assault after an altercation and de-arrested soon after. But were their actions justified? Are you happy with the police? But this show is nothing without you and your views, especially on this very special day. So let me know your thoughts on all the stories we're discussing today, and email messages in for your mum as well. That's very important. Get in touch on gbviews@gbnews.com or message me on our socials. We're at GB News. And as it is Mother's Day, has the whole holiday just become a little bit tacky? I have to say, some of the gifts out there. And why is everything pink? My mum hates pink. I just want to know, what's the worst thing you've been gifted on Mothering Sunday? Send us any fun stories, or just simply send us a message to your mum telling how much you love her. That's a good thing to do. But first, let's get the news headlines with Sophia.
Thanks, Dawn. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story this hour. The Princess of Wales has thanked the public for their support as the first photo of the royal was published after her abdominal surgery. The image, posted on social media to mark Mother's Day, was taken by the Prince of Wales in Windsor earlier this week. Sitting down, Princess Catherine is surrounded by her children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis. She was admitted to hospital on January the 16th and left 2 weeks later following a planned operation. She's expected to return to her royal duties after Easter. Meanwhile, police are questioning a man after his car crashed into the gates of Buckingham Palace. The incident happened at 2:30 on Saturday morning. Our royal correspondent Cameron Walker has more.
We understand the gates were damaged, and social media footage or images shows armed police swooping on the car. We know that the individual driving the car was arrested. The gates are also being repaired as well. What we don't know is the exact circumstances as to why the car crashed into those gates. We haven't been given any details of a motive by police, or indeed whether or not it was accidental. Metropolitan Police perhaps will give us more details later on today. But as I said, no members of the royal family were in residence, so hopefully the only thing that is damaged is indeed the gates, which of course are being hastily repaired.
In other royal news, Princess Diana's brother, Charles Spencer, says he was sexually abused from the age of 11 at boarding school. In an extract from his memoir published in the Mail on Sunday, Al Spencer says he was targeted by a female member of staff at Maidwell Hall in Northamptonshire, leaving him with lifelong demons. In a statement, the school said it's difficult to read about the practices, which were sadly sometimes believed to be normal and acceptable at that time. Pro-Palestinian protesters are being warned they could be lending credence to extremists. The Community Secretary is urging people to question which groups are organising the marches. Michael Gove, who's due to publish a new official definition of extremism, told the Sunday Telegraph there's no excuse for ignorance and good-hearted demonstrators need to be aware they risk fuelling hate and intimidation. A US military ship carrying aid equipment to build a temporary pier off the coast of Gaza is on its way to the Middle East. The US Central Command confirmed the support ship, General Frank S. Besson, set sail from Virginia. It comes after President Biden confirmed the US would build a floating harbour to help get more aid to Gaza by sea, after aid deliveries by land and air have proved difficult and dangerous. The UN has warned that famine in the Gaza Strip is almost inevitable and children there are starving to death. A number of bodies have been removed from a funeral director in Yorkshire as part of a police investigation. Cordons remain in place at 3 branches of Legacy Independent Funeral Directors after Humberside Police received reports of concern for care of the deceased. The bodies have been taken to the local authority mortuary in Hull while they try to establish whether any criminal offences have been committed. Police have set up a direct line for anyone who may be affected. A group of mothers are staging a hunger strike outside Parliament. The 5-day protest aims to draw attention to parents who can't afford to eat and are skipping meals to feed their children. Their list of demands include enforcing free school meals and universal credit to guarantee life's essentials. MPs are due to address the issue on Tuesday. And cars that don't comply with London's ULEZ rules can now be donated to Ukraine under the scrappage scheme. Mayor Sadiq Khan says from next week, drivers who give up their vehicles will be able to apply for grants of up to £2,000. Kyiv's Mayor Vitaly Klitschko reportedly suggested the idea of exporting the cars in a letter to his counterpart. A charity will facilitate the move. The donated vehicles will be used to support humanitarian and medical needs. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Dawn.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Let's get straight into today's stories then, shall we? Now, Michael Gove says he's told pro-Palestine protesters they risk rubbing shoulders with extremists. The Levelling Up Secretary pledged to expose groups trying to subvert democracy and warned that some pro-Palestine events have been organised by extremist organisations. Now, we all know there was a march in London yesterday. There were only 5 arrests, so remarkably peaceful considering how many people were there. But we did once again hear those chants, didn't we? Not as many as we have in the past, but from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. So we've heard those chants, which could be deemed offensive. We saw people wearing masks, which they're not meant to do anymore. So is Michael Gove right to say we need to tackle this extremism and introduce new regulations that define what extremism is and also add some new groups to that list? Benjamin, coming to you first on this one.
I think he's absolutely right to say that there have been extremists on these marches. You know, if I went on a march and someone from the BNP was next to me in that, would I go back next Saturday? Probably not. I'd feel very uncomfortable if they were re-invited. And so I think that's a good comparison to what we've seen in these marches. I have no doubt that the vast...
But would you keep going back if you knew...
Well, I wouldn't go in the first place.
Yeah, I'm so discombobulated by upsetting my mum, by the way. Hello, Mum. I still